Hi, today I'm going to share with you 5 watercolor techniques for beginners. Let's jump to the first one, wet on wet. So the wet on wet technique is when you paint watercolor on a wet surface of paper. Wet on wet, or some people also call it wet into wet, is the most common technique used in watercolor painting. You can apply the wet on wet for a landscape, portrait, or still life painting. So first, load your brush with plain water and paint on a paper. If there's too much water on the paper, you can simply dry your brush and use it to absorb more water from the paper. We don't want to create water puddles here. Next, you will dip your brush into the plain water and then pick up some pigments from your palette. You can also mix the colors on your palette and then apply the color onto the wet surface of paper. We can also add more pigments to the paper if we think that it's too pale. Usually I just use the wet on wet technique for the first layer when I want different colors to blend naturally together without leaving the marks. And it's perfect for painting the background or create the blurry effect when the background is blurry. You can use different brushes to apply painting wet on wet. There are also different ways to apply the color as well. So the first one, we try with the flat brush and we move the brush back and forth. The second way is we can use a round brush and pick some pigment. And this time we will not move the brush back and forth, but instead we just add some dots of pigments onto the wet surface. So you can see that the color just flows naturally on the wet surface. The second technique I want to introduce you today is the wet on dry technique. In this case, you will use a wet brush with color to paint on a dry surface. The wet on dry technique is easy to use and it's better to control the final result. Artists paint wet on dry when they want to get precise details or sharp edges such as cast shadows or eyelashes. So now if you compare the wet on dry technique to the wet on wet technique, you can see that the wet on dry has sharper edge, right? Now let's try the wet on dry technique with the round brush. The third technique that we will use today is glazing. So the glazing technique is simple yet fun to use in watercolor painting. This technique is about painting a shape wet on dry on a paper sheet and then let it dry completely, and after that you will paint another shape over the top of the previous one. So because the watercolor is very transparent, the final result is you can see the overlap shapes that has darker color or sometimes even a new color mixed between the two original colors. So now I have to wait for the two flower petals to dry completely before I apply the third one. Remember to paint the later layers quickly to avoid reactivating the previous layers. The glazing effect is very useful in realistic painting when you have an object partially shined by the sunlight and the other part is still in the shadow, so the part in the shadow will have the bluish or brownish color. If you like this video so far, subscribe and hit the bell button as it's a huge support for my channel. Thank you! If you want to have a smooth and uniform area without the appearance of brush strokes, use the wash technique. There are 3 types of washes, and the first one is flat wash. To create a flat wash after the first brush stroke, load the brush again with the same color and paint right next to the previous painted area when it's still wet, so the colors in those areas can mix. Repeat the steps until you have a large surface painted. You need to keep the same color consistency in every brush stroke. The last technique that we learned today is to create the gradient wash, or they also call it the graded wash. Similar to the flat wash technique, but we want to create a gradient wash this time. It means that the density of the pigments reduces after every brush stroke. To achieve this, you will need to dip the brush into plain water after each brush stroke and mix the wet brush with the color on the palette to reduce the density of the pigments. Then apply a new brush stroke on the paper. Using a single color for the gradient wash technique, it takes some time to practice and to control how much water you have in your brush. The gradient wash can be used when you paint flowers, leaves, and the clear sky when they have gradient color. Until now, you have already learned 5 basic but powerful watercolor techniques. However, I would love to introduce you a bonus one, variegated wash. To create a variegated wash, use 2 colors instead of 1. Here are simple steps to create a variegated wash. First, we will paint a gradient wash with the first color, and then you wash your brush thoroughly before loading the second color. After that, paint a gradient wash with the second color, starting from the other side of the painting area. Repeat until the 2 colors mix together. The final result of a variegated wash should be a spectrum of colors that blend smoothly from one side to the other. And that's the last technique we learned today. I hope the tutorial is informative and helpful. Let me know in the comment if you have any questions. Please don't be shy to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye!